In this video, I will show you how to test your React application using Cypress, how to get started testing your app. Really, at the end of this video, you should be able to write end-to-end tests and component tests for your React applications. I will be using a project that I am currently working on. I would suggest you do the same if you have any old projects you want to write test on, or if you want to create a brand new project, is all fine. I'm also going to the first thing we're going to do is install Cypress, really. And I have the Cypress docs open. This is one of the best written docs I've ever read. It's so comprehensive. You can find it on docs.cypress.io. I would really advise you to get it, to read it rather. It's a really comprehensive doc. So first we want to, of course, impre- install Cypress in our project as a dev dependency. Probably should have installed this already to save some time. Um, cool. So after this is installed, we want to run Cypress by typing npm cypress run. This is going to run our Cypress, or you could just easily add it to our test script. And this will be Cypress open. This should be npx cypress open, not npx cypress run. And so we can just run our test script using npm run test, and this should spin Cypress open for us. And this is Cypress opening. We can just configure our end-to-end tests first. Click on this box, and this is going to create some configuration files from us, for some default configuration files in our folder, our current workspace. This is initializing config. And by the way, the best way to write your test is to use the TDD format. This is a test-driven development format where you write your test even before writing the code, and this just gives you time to plan out the way you want the project to go, and then you write your code to follow the format you've written in the test. But of course, we are not following that, or I am not following that in this video. But if you'll be testing later on, this is just the best practice. So I want to choose a browser for end-to-end test. I generally use Brave browser, but it's not an option here, so use Chrome. I'm going to start the end-to-end test. We currently don't have any spec written. This is just what we call our test. They are called specs, but we can just scaffold example test, or we create a new empty spec. I really, for some reason, like seeing the Cypress default test, so I'm just going to scaffold example test. These are the example test files that we're giving. We are going to delete them, but I also find that they are really good test cases to read and see the way Cypress have structured their test. It will really help you to write your tests better, so you can go through those files. But if we run one of those tests, this is getting started, and we can see from this base URL that is going to show up any minutes from now. So we can see this is the base URL that Cypress is testing this app on, and we can see that of course all of their tests passes, and we can kind of like see the test they have written. So now let's jump back to our text editor and write our own test. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete their tests, their folder, because we really don't need it. And in the end-to-end folder, I am going to create a home folder, because your website or your project can have multiple pages and you want to test each page end to end. Really, that's what I do. So we can just go ahead and create a new file to be tested. My file is written in TypeScript, so I'm going to follow that format for TypeScript. And Yeah, let's write some tests. If you have tested using any form of test before, just Jasmine, Mocha, this pattern should not be unfamiliar. But first we are describing what we want to test, and I want to test my own page. I want to test that it loads successfully, and then I am going to no see why this is Cypress dot visit. Then I am going to visit the home page to be sure that this loads up correctly. Oh, this is actually 3000. And yes, you want to make sure that you are running your application locally, because that is what we're going to be testing. So you want to make sure you're running your app locally before you write the test. I am running this on port 3000. This is localhost, and you can see we have an error. And if I change this extension to JavaScript, this error goes away. But I want to be consistent with the language in which my project is written, so I'll be using TypeScript even for the test. And this error should come back because we don't have ts config. I have ts config at the root of my project, but the Cypress docs recommend that we create a tsconfig.json file in the Cypress folder that is at the root of our folder. So I'll be copying this command. I'll go back to my text editor. I'll create a tsconfig.json file, and I'm going to copy and paste this command in it. And I can also see from the docs that I should restart the IDE, restart TypeScript in the IDE if I am still getting the error. Okay, I am not, but if I was, I would have restarted it. So basically, I want to make sure that my home page loads successfully. And if I go back to our test is still running, right? We're running it on Chrome. If I go back to that and I click on this home page, I can see that this loads successfully. Yay. So you would notice that this test loaded quite slowly, and this is because we are telling Cypress where to load when we are running the test, right? So I want to add this um link to my configuration file. So before I even run the test, Cypress already knows beforehand where to visit. And let me just show you what I mean. I'm going to close this and I'm going to start the end-to-end test again. And this is loading. If I click on the home, by default, I don't have any base URL. So it's just assigning random URL. And when it's running the test, it has this kind of like refresh. It's quite fast, but then it counts. Every second counts. So we want to avoid that by adding this link to our base URL to tell Cypress beforehand that visit this. So I'm going to be adding this to my config file. And you can find it was automatically generated when we spawn Cypress. Spawn, I mean the past tense of spin, by the way. I don't know why I use that word. So we click on Cypress config. I'm going to add base URL, and okay, there's literally no need. This is not a JSON file, so I don't have to wrap the keys in quote marks. So this is going to work fine. And if we run our app again, let's just reload. This is taking too much time, so I'm just going to stop. Okay. Since I changed the configuration, I'm just going to stop the test and rerun it. Let's go back to our test and see that we are still able to visit our base URL. All right, Cypress anytime now. Okay, cool. So it's already configured, starting our end-to-end test, and open in this. click on this, and as we can see, this runs. Yeah, so this runs. I can see that the API is being consumed, fetch, the font awesome, um, library, the fonts that I'm using, everything works fine. So, and the app loads up just fine. Now, when we talk about testing our app end to end, we want to talk about, we just basically mean, testing the way the user will test. We want to test how will our app run, does everything work fine? And I want to kind of like test that when a user comes on, they can see my header, they can search for a post, they can see the categories available, and they can search for the post. Basically, just putting yourself in the shoes of your user and testing the application, how your user is going to use it. So first, I want to test that the header loads, because obviously, if a user uses my app, I want the header to load. So I'm going to test that it displays the header, and I'm also going to test that it contains, under the header, I know that there is a test that says tech trans, so I want to be sure that it contains this phrase tech trans. So I made a typo, tech trans, so it might just be cool to see what we get, and we'll see that this timed out we get an error because basically there's nothing like this. So I'm going to correct this, and we can see that this works correctly and it displays the header. I think I also want to display that this nav links work, because basically I want my users to be able to navigate. So I'm going to go to the home page and kind of like, let's close this, we don't need this. Actually we need nav bar. I want to actually see what to test for. I know there's tech trans. Okay, so I want to get the nav bar navigation and get that the home, about, and the contact, the children are basically there. So I can go here and get that, basically just like I would get it with jQuery, because underlying under the old Cypress uses jQuery. So I can just get this class name, navbar navigation. Okay. And I can check that it's children, and it has children, and the children should have a length of 3. And I can check Cypress and see that this works. If I make this 30, for example, I don't have to make the test field to show that this works correctly rather. But if I put any arbitrary value there, I can say that this doesn't pass. And this can be helpful when you're trying to think of your app and you're like, okay, I know that I want my header to definitely contain this. I want my header to contain about 5 nav links, or about contacts, visits, blah, blah, blah. And then when you're building your app, you already know that, okay, this is what it should have. This is why TGD is really good. Now I'm just testing the app as it goes based on what I've worked on. But in reality, the best way to go would have been to have written tests and then write my project, write my application based on the tests that I have written. What else can we test on the home page? I can test that I can test that this nav bar, and I'm just going to give this, rather, since it seems like I'll be using this often, and I'm just going to use nav. I'm just going to give the class name. And I can test that this nav bar, right, that it actually contains the text that I want you to contain. And I can do this by running this. Basically is like using the for each loop in JavaScript. It's essentially the same. It follows the same logic, and I want to expect that the first child contains right? And I can also check that the last child contains contact, and we can see that this still runs. Again, I'm going to deliberately break the app to show that if it's not working as is, it's going to give us the notification that, yeah, this contact, what do you mean? And I'm like, oops, okay, this is not it. So this is the header. I can also test for all of these links basically, and I'm just going to check again what I wrote to see what I'm testing the links for. We can see that the parent is called navbar sm or such. So outside of this, I can just get navbar sm li the links, and I expect that they should have a length of 6. Actually, they should have a length of 6 because I have like 6 social media pages I like to show, and this is basically going to tell me that it found 5 instead of 6, and now I know that okay, a social media page is missing. I omitted this. So but for now, for the sake of this video, I'm going to leave it as 5 to show that okay, this passes. I also want that they have that each child has an attribute of each. No, the links are not going to have an attribute, rather, but the so basically in the links I have I have in the links rather I have anchor tags, and I want to be sure that these anchor tags have attributes of href, because basically this tells me that okay, indeed they are anchor tags, because I want to be sure that okay, I have a link, and inside of these links are anchor tags redirecting my user to this my social media pages. And so I can check it using this command, and I can see that this, I can expand on this and see that this runs correctly. The cool thing is that I can also be sure that these links are clickable by using the command click. I don't like this command because basically, okay, this is not going to click because it requires a DOM element. The subject received was okay. I can't nest this. I think what it's saying is I can't nest this, but I can say that I can click on this, and since there are multiple links, I can also set that multiple should be true, because basically it's not just one link at this point. And yeah, you see, they're all clickable, but I don't want to run this because every time I come back to run this, then I know that it's probably going to, for instance, if I try to write a separate test and I come back here and it runs again, it's going to open up all of those links. So yeah, I don't want this. I can say that it's an anchor tag, and I can see that it's been clicked. So I'm going to close all of this, and then we can continue to work with this. So you can write more. I definitely would write more later on, but I see that it displays the headers. It has tech trans. It's the nav as children. They have home. They have contact. The links are all there. I'm kind of like good with this header, and I would test all of this. The search bar, the categories. But I think one prominent thing to actually check on the home page would be the post, right? And so I can just check that it actually displays the post, and yeah, I would kind of like go to the post page to know what to actually test for. But again, if I had gone the TDD approach first, I would not need to do this. Now you can see from what we did with the header that we are testing the class names directly, but um Cypress doesn't actually recommend this. It is not one of the best practices to test with either to get an element in our project with the class name or ID. It's actually recommended that we use this format of getting the data, and I think I'll actually link that in the description below. Just find it straight up. Best practices. It's written by Cypress. If you read the docs, you can see it. But for easy navigation, I'll add it. So basically, they want us to have a direct tag of accessing this element, because basically I can decide that I now want to rename this class name, or if I'd gone the TDD approach first and I decide that okay, at implementation of code, I don't want to name this post anymore, I want to name this post body, then that means the test is going to fail, not because it doesn't exist but because the class name was altered. But if I have this data.cy, there's really no need for me, or this data attribute that is specifically targeting Cypress, there's really no need for me to change this at any point. And if I do change it, I know that okay, I need to change where it's been called, because nothing in my application is going to change this. But class name can be changed for varying reasons. So I hope that's clear why Cypress recommends that data.ui is a best practice. And so I'm just going to try to get the elements using this data attribute. I'm going to call it I called it post, so we're going to use post, and we want to be sure that this should be visible. And if we go to Cypress, we can see that it indeed displays post. If at any point let's say my users cannot see my post, for instance, if the API I'm consuming is broken or whatever is broken, let me set this display to none. If for any reason my user cannot see this post, then I would be alerted that okay, something let me try to refresh this. Yeah, so I can see that something is broken because this is definitely not visible. So I'm just going to I'll be alerted on my test, so I can always test that my users can see my post, otherwise they cannot. And you can also test for different things really. And again, I'm just going to assign this to a variable. I'm going to call this post. Post should be visible. I can also test that my post should okay, I think I have image in my post, right? Because really I can test for my post that it exists. I can test that okay, the image is actually being displayed. There is a title, there is a category, there is a description, and there is a date. These are all the things that I can test for in this test, but I won't be testing for everything to save some time. But I can definitely test that okay, so let me test for a few other things and then you get the main point. I can test that the post image is visible, and if I go to Cypress, I can expand on this and see that indeed this is visible. So I'm going to commit this as we quickly run into component testing. Seeing this many uncommented code just freaks me out. All right, so yeah, let's jump to and this is home folder, by the way, because I expect that you might want to test the about or contact. These are not currently wired up, but if they are, you also want to run an end-to-end test about when your user goes to your about page, how are they able to navigate, can they see everything, is everything working out fine. Same for contact page and as many pages as you might have. Now we are going to go to Cypress. We're going to switch our testing type. We'll switch over to component testing. It has detected our framework. You don't need to change this, it has detected it. And then we have successfully installed all our required dependencies, because in our React app we have all of these things already. We don't need to do any extra work. We can continue, and again it's going to generate files that are peculiar to components, and then we're just going to continue initializing our config file for our components. And we are just going to select a browser again to start component testing in Chrome. All right, cool. So there are no default tests here for us, but we can create new empty spec, and I'm just going to call this sidebar to test our sidebar. And we want to run the spec, but this should not run because no commands were issued. Now cool, let's go over to our text editor and play around with some code. If we go to our sidebar, as you can see, some things have been written for us because it generated the text. I'm just going to remove this, call this mount, and what we call is its mount, and we call the sidebar. I think this is correct, but I'm just going to load up the sidebar in the components just to be sure. Okay, this is correctly spelled, but we need to import the component we are testing, and I think this can be found. Going to go outside of our Cypress folder into source and into components. Now this is all good, but we can see that we are running into some TypeScript issues. JSX is not set, and we know that so we're definitely running into some TypeScript issues. And if we go over to our config.json file, we can see that everything is looking. First, let us add our TSX. We did not include our TXS as a path, only TypeScript, and this is definitely not a TypeScript file, it's a TSX. So we're just going to rename this folder to TSX, and let's see what other issues we are getting here. JSX flag was not provided. I'm first going to restart TS server, and see if this issue persists. And does it? Okay. Control S. All right, it doesn't. Cool. No, it does. Cannot use JSX unless the JS quick fix. In our configuration file, yeah, we definitely have JSX to be used. So I'm just going to import React globally from React. By the way, component testing is still in beta facing for Cypress, but it still works just fine. And now this has cleared it. Cool. So let's go back to no spec is found, but let's click on this and be sure that no specs is indeed found, and we can see that our sidebar is indeed mounted as categories. We can run a few tests like we did with, it's quite similar with end-to-end testing, just the difference in the way we are mounting and that we are testing for this component specifically. So I can test that this component indeed contains something called categories, hoping that the spelling and everything is in sync. I can also test that I can try to get the UL and the LIs, and right now this is going to be dynamic based on the data being pulled in from the server, but we're just going to assume for now that this is indeed just to data, and I'm going to test that the LIs should have a length of 2. We're just going to run over to a Cypress, and indeed this runs. And you can test that these things have class. I can test that there is a class name Okay, we've already tested that. Let us call this sidebar container, right? And I can go back here, call this again, and we are looking for our sidebar container, and I expect that it has a class to be sure that my classes are properly being loaded. That's a class of sidebar container. And if I check my test, I should see that indeed this runs. And if the style sheet isn't being pulled in, I can know that okay, my users can indeed see this component, but the style sheet is missing. And so this is all about getting started, testing your component and testing your end to end in React using Cypress. I know that front end testing is not something, or testing is not something that front end folks give too much thought about, but it can come handy, and it definitely sets us apart. Basically, I mean, you're testing all your folder and you're getting a more comprehensive way to see how your app runs, and if indeed it runs, thinking about TDD even before writing any part of your code. And I'll highly recommend that you visit this documentation. It has things like CI, GitHub Actions, testing code even before they you merge to your main dev or main branch on GitHub, checking whatever you want to check. If you're working with a team of people, you're checking the UI, and it has all of these GitHub actions that you can run, and you can check the API for the commands that you can use. There are so many helpful commands that you can use, the each, the and all of these things. And this documentation is really well written, so I highly recommend that you check it out and test your applications. See you on my next video. Please subscribe if this video was anyway helpful. It helps to support the channel. Bye.